right, calling this meeting to order. We'll begin with a roll call vote.
Mr. Updegrove?
Here.
Mr. Hemingway?
Here.
Ms. Deeroff?
Present.
Ms. Hogan?
Present.
Mrs. Denon? Mr. Brophy?
Here.
Ms. Nyman? Mrs. McWhorter?
Here.
Mr. Foose?
Here. All right, we'll move to Pledge of Allegiance and moment of silence. All right, so this is a special meeting that was called due to the ongoing developments with the coronavirus, and we'll get into that topic shortly. But per a typical meeting, we do have some of the standard portions like public comment. So I'm going to see if anybody has signed up for public comment. All right, we have nobody signed up for public comment, so we will move right into the matter at hand.
Mr. President, this conversation has two folds. It's a conversation about obviously us dealing with infectious disease situation that has arisen, and then the second part, obviously direct related, is travel. A lot of business as well as governmental agencies are having to step back and consider the ramifications of their current normal practices. Significant too was the question, obviously also one colleague who wanted and asked about when we were going to discuss this. The issue at hand is that as we are trying to be prepared to be responsive to this situation, which is a bigger issue first. As early as probably a week and a half ago, we started receiving information from the BCIU. Of course, we continue to receive information from the Secretary of Ed, who funnels information to us, as well as we ourselves are actively monitoring the Center for Disease Control. I actually get alerts and updates from Center for Disease Control as part of my enrollment in an alert process. I will tell you this highlights a situation that we just spoke about. Currently, our district does not really have a true designated coordinator of nursing services. Our nurses are associated with the Department of Health, so they have guidelines and regulations that they have to adhere to, as you kind of learned through one other incident we just dealt with. So we also get information from them as another source of information, because they also are getting information directly from the Pennsylvania Department of Health that is sent directly to them. I will tell you the challenge is that it's a blessing and it's a curse, because we're getting overwhelmed with information. And one of the things that we have to be aware of and thoughtful about is the fact that this is a multi-tiered issue that we're facing. Currently, as of today, the latest review is, and don't quote me exactly on the numbers, but I'm doing this from memory because we keep reading a lot. I mean, pretty much today I've almost been glued to my desk trying to get up to date in preparation for this meeting and reading a lot of stuff, and so has Ms. Torsia. But there's roughly about 60 now U.S. cases. Of those, 33 are actual confirmed cases, so it's important to know that 27 are what they call under investigation. So there is a difference, but 60 incidences, I should say, overall. And that equates to, I'm doing this from memory, probably anywhere from 8 to 10 U.S. states that have now been impacted most recently. And of course, the recent change for us has been a state of destination now for some of our students. So we have within a week a trip that is scheduled to go, and then I think roughly a month for another trip. We have not received any advisories that say either through the overseas trip is that their locations have been level 4, which would restrict, or pretty much say restrict. A level 3 by CDC would basically be kind of a caution. If you don't have to go, you shouldn't go type thing. And then the same exists in the U.S. cities that have happened. In the U.S. cities, we are sitting at, I'm trying to do this from memory from all the reading, probably 6, I remember, deaths at this current time. It is important to note that in comparison, that some are trying to strike a balance in the paranoia that is striking. We have over 8,000 deaths just from the normal flu, to put it in perspective. The challenge, I think, with this case that's different is that, unlike the flu, they're scrambling to try to find a treatment or antibiotic, which adds a little bit difference to this situation. What? Antiviral. Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Wouldn't want that to stand. Antiviral solution to it, which we have neither right now in the case for the current situation. So that's the slight twist to this situation. One of the things that this has revealed that was either by virtue of turnover or it just doesn't exist. And I say that to be fair, because when you don't have people here, we have been trying to find a true infectious disease protocol, preparedness plan. And so far, I've not been able to get one. So we have been working on our own from resources that have been provided to have that should we suffer an incident that will impact us. This coming March, this is either this week or next week, this county superintendents will be back on a conference call to try to discuss the matter. We typically in Berks County have been known to be very collaborative and collective in our processes. We're well known on the Hill as a group that goes as a collective mass when we deal with legislative issues. So an issue of this nature, there's a lot of communication going back and forth to try to have some consistency and exchange of resources to respond to this situation. One of our main requirements is supposed to be a conduit of information to the public to help, one, keep them informed, and then two, because we have a population we serve that pays attention to us. So we spent most of the day, let me back up too, we purposely had not communicated anything yet because we knew this was going to be an evolving matter. So we tried to be cautious and deliberate in our efforts to respond to this matter. Now it's gotten to the point that since it's now sitting and growing in our backyard that we needed to respond. Carol, can you switch over to, so for the public that will be viewing this later, and to those here, we have, as asked to be a conduit of resources, developed a link on our website. So if you go to our webpage and then you scroll down, you will see right up on the important announcements a link that goes to that section of our webpage that will start to provide information. This is newly launched today, an introduction to what our role is in this process as a school. And then most importantly, what just went out to all parents tonight was this letter to speak to the current status. In it, it will take parents to the Center for Disease Control Information, as well as the PA Department of Health. And then I go on to address the fact that we are trying to prepare ourselves in case there is a situation that arises locally, or if we get a directive, a higher power, governor's office, the Department of Health, or someone that says you need to close schools. And so the Office of Teaching and Learning was instructed today to begin looking at reviewing options should that happen, to try to keep some sort of semblance of teaching and learning going on if we are in that situation. We also met today, and probably the most time he's ever spent in my office with our Director of Facilities, being very clear about them making sure they have a cleaning protocol. I will tell the board that he was directed that I do not care about cost. It's a safety issue that we need to be able to quickly deploy a cleaning crew to a school, and we would expect that we would trace the trail of where it needs to be cleaned, short of having to shut down the whole school. So if we had an incident, for example, in a classroom with a known student that was diagnosed, then what is going to be our protocol immediately once school is out to clean that area so that it is functional the next day? And I say to you that that is a conversation piece that is a combination of our capacity in-house to the fact that he's contacted an external agency to have them on standby to be able to respond so that we can quickly make the necessary arrangements to clean the area or areas in particular school so that we don't lose the whole school day or function of our educational institution. We also had a conversation with solicitor for those who may have questions or concerns. First of all, his response was to this matter that liability is always a risk, but he calls it a low risk because people can always file a complaint or suit. We can't control that. As a state entity related, we have very little liability because we have immunity, separate from doing something irresponsible or reckless that would strip us of that. Beyond that, someone can always try to go federal, but he then said at this point, that is not really something that we should be worried about, that it really is a safety conversation at this point because, of course, our insurance would kick in to help cover some of the cost factors if there is an issue with the legal side of it. So this really becomes a safety conversation, and we are working to develop, as I said, preparedness and response, what we call infectious disease control response for the district, should that be required. The site is intended to provide a lot of information. We will also be providing parents and teachers resources on how to have conversations with our students. But at the end of the day, the biggest thing that's coming out of this is how we respond as adults will dictate how our children respond to this. Probably one of the most eye-opening, and for people who we did this intentionally. We put one of the videos explaining what the virus is, because for sometimes that's better for some people rather than always trying to read information and comprehend it. Carol, can you click on the link? Scroll down to the one that up under my letter.
Your letter?
Up under the letter. Yep.
So we need to get the facts straight. How
Now we're not going to play this whole thing,
where does it want to go?
but I think it's about 5 minutes. It says on there. I'm sharing this because in the audience, some of you may find this very useful as a resource that will help kind of get to the crux of what we're dealing with. And then if you scroll down, we've separated information by information from the Center for Disease Control, the PA Department of Health, and then some prevention strategies. The most significant thing that we are faced with is that we have got to make sure that everyone is washing their hands, covering their mouths, those types of things when they're coughing. If you are sick, it is advisable to stay home. The Secretary has also provided guidance on us being a little bit more lenient with attendance issues, given the current circumstances that we're facing with this situation. But the biggest one, and we've created a lot of links on here about washing your hands, and at least needs to be 20 seconds. Not the cursory, just run it through, that we're always in a hurry. And we have videos for those who don't want to read about it or look at the posters. We've included a video link to go over that situation. We typically, just so you know, the board knows, and I'll turn over any questions or comments. We'll do the best we can. Department of Health and Governor's Office, PDE, will dictate, for lack of a better term, the crisis response with regards to if we take any drastic measures with shutting down school. Short of there being an identified emergency that we have to immediately deal with, which the superintendent then could shut down, we won't really be going that route unless the Department of Health or somebody of a higher agency said to do so. I would encourage our parents who have concerns to communicate to their school and their principal before doing something, like keeping their children home so we can talk through what it is that you are concerned about. so that we can try to work with you to develop a plan of action if you have concerns, so your children can still get something provided to them for teaching and learning. I get it. Everybody's an individual. And I can't tell you or dismiss anybody's individual fears. So we're trying to be respectful, but try to be supportive, but we want our children to still be able to come to school. With that, that's the first part of the conversation, which is really about the virus itself. And then this is a two-part conversation, which was also about field trips that you have, because the board ultimately, by policy, approves field trips. So we have a list on the site that you all have already approved. You have two, I think, that are coming up that will become for your approval, but it's a chance for you also to talk and discuss your thoughts about where we are in that nature. Ultimately, there's no action you take here, other than if you have a different approach you want about field trips, that would need to come to a voting meeting for you to rescind any of those trips, unless I am directed to take an emergency action to do that on your behalf. You follow what I'm saying? So with that, I'll be quiet for a moment.
All right, I'm gonna go to I'm gonna go to everybody else in just a minute. I just have one thing to piggyback off of that real quick. One thing that I noticed, I think we can all play a part in helping to make sure that accurate information is getting out. One of my children is currently under the weather, and his sibling joked, "Oh, does he have the coronavirus?" And I said, "Please do not go around school saying that." But it's kind of funny, but at the same time, that is how something can easily spread that in the community, oh, so-and-so is out of school for whatever reason. So please try to just be mindful of that is something I caution everybody about. Ms. McWhorter. Right, Mr. Brophy.
Okay, so the first trip I guess we're looking at is the Orlando, Florida trip, obviously, because it's going to be into where there's a lot of people.
Right.
And going into, I have heard nothing.
Right. If I could
Yeah.
actually, Mr. Brophy, the one is just in general about any questions, and then we're going to get to the trips. If you
Oh,
don't mind.
okay.
I just want to make sure
Yeah.
what
No,
I've shared
that was
about
it.
what we're trying to do. Facilities is here
No.
to answer any questions or thoughts that y'all have just about a general as a school district.
Okay. That's
Your thoughts or expectations, and then we'll get to the trip issue.
Okay, there are mechanical misters out there that you can use, that you can buy for spraying down the school. Do we have any of those? Are we looking at any of those?
Yes, we. Wayne, you might be able to add on to this, but there was a device bought some years ago before my tenure here for the wrestling rooms to combat viruses and things like that can be utilized in the rooms. You put it in the room, you set it per the square footage in the room, move some ceiling tiles so you get above the ceiling. You set this thing off, it takes tablets, and it sanitizes the entire room. You open all the cabinet doors and everything, it basically sanitizes the entire room.
Okay, they have some hand ones like that now.
Yes, we also have-
They're about $700.
We also have one of those in our shop up there for isolated situations, like if we know a child had a flu and then a second child had a flu, and they're both in the same room, we will go to that room and we will sanitize it. It's always done on second shift, usually when nobody's around, because we don't want to
Is
stir
there any
any.
recommendation for pellets yet? Because I haven't heard anything yet on pellets for those. The pellets you put into them.
What about them?
Is there any recommendations yet on the strength you're supposed to use
Um,
with the bleach? I haven't heard anything yet.
No,
Just
what
asking
what
questions.
we use is comparable to the we call it Formula H, which will take out HIV-2.
Okay,
So it's a very strong substance, but once it's neutralized, once it hits a surface, within a couple of minutes it's neutralized.
Yes.
So yeah,
Okay, so that's-
it takes care of business.
okay,
Yeah.
good, thank you.
Ms. McWhorter.
So I just wanted to continue on just a little bit more information about infectious diseases and the flu and coronavirus. And to add on, just don't wash your hands with water. Wash them with soap and water. And it doesn't need to be antibacterial soap. It can just be plain, regular soap. So flu, I went on, like Dr. Bedden, I've been every day getting onto the CDC website and the WHO website and the PD Health, Pennsylvania Department of Health website, looking to see what they're doing and what kind of recommendations. And I've been doing this over the past week, and they haven't made that many changes. And you may want to tell me to shut up at some point. And okay, so flu. Just to put this all in perspective, there's 327 million people in the U.S., and the CDC estimates that this year alone, there'll be 32 to 45 million that get the illness, 14 to 21 million that will actually go to the doctor, 310 to 560,000 hospitalizations, and 18 to 46,000 deaths. Even though Dr. Bedden said 12,000, I've heard both numbers, but that's to date. And the CDC also has the flu is peaking right now, so we'll see what happens there. So this coronavirus that we don't know that much about started in China, and it's I think important to note that they don't have a well-established health infrastructure in China, for starters. They have about 80,000 cases and about just under 3,000 deaths from those cases that are mostly immunosuppressed or the elderly. And not to lessen anyone's death, but I just want to give you a comparison to the flu, to the coronavirus that we've seen so far. So it's about, in China, it's about a 3.6% death rate. If you look at the rest of the world that has gotten this, which would be about 10,000 or just over 10,000, the death rate is lower. It's about 1.7%. And where you look at, like I've also been looking at the Netherlands and France and the UK, the cases that are there in those countries are, they've had obvious connections to either traveling in Italy or close with someone who's been traveling in Italy for all three of the countries. And then they've had a couple of anomalies that they're looking into. This is a very contagious virus, so I don't want to belittle it, but I think especially the younger people, they are not getting as sick. And I think that if you are diligent about washing your hands and even if we can get our kids to wipe down their desks daily with, I don't know, if we can get alcohol wipes, or I think that also would be a big help. And not just for coronavirus, but for the flu and any colds. It's like I remember with my kids about 2 or 3 weeks into school, everybody would be coming home with a cold. And I see that right now on social media that a lot of kids are sick, having the flu. So that's it. Do you guys have any questions about what I have?
Can you just, for anyone who might not know, what is your profession and title?
Okay, so I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I'm a chemist, and for the first 15 or 20 years of my career, I make pharmaceutical products on a small scale that go into the initial assays to ensure that the compounds are active against what we're doing it. And so for the first half of my career, I was mostly doing antiviral chemistry. I was making drugs specifically for antivirals, specifically for the most of the time I spent was for picornavirus, which is most of your common cold viruses. And that's pico-RNA, not coronavirus, just to make that clear.
I just figured I'd lend a little bit of gravitas to it. It's more than you just doing some Google searches.
Right, right. I do have a background And I know, it's the touching of the face. If you're familiar with how they do drug trials for antivirals like the coronavirus or the flu or common cold, is they might infect one or two people and then they put them all in a room together without Kleenex or anything else, playing cards. And that is how the virus is spread, because these people touch the cards or whatever else, and then they touch their face and they rub their eyes, and that is how viruses get into, these cold viruses and flu viruses get into your system, is through your nose and your eyes and your mouth. So that is the important thing as well with our students, to emphasize, is don't touch your face.
I think as you were saying that, I was doing this. Ms. Hogan.
So this is a simple question, and I probably already know the answer. But are we reviewing those simple things like washing your hands for 20 seconds, trying not to touch your face with our children? Like, is that being reviewed in school? I know it's up there, but I mean, is it being reviewed as part of the school day?
The answer is generically it has, but now they will be getting formal directives from myself from this point going forward. So that one, we just sent out a communication today from the director of facilities that went to everyone. And I thought I brought it. I may have. Yes, that went out, is what, basically he sent out what I can do to prevent the coronavirus infections in my school. And it talked about we really don't need to take anything special. We just need to do what we're supposed to do to stop spread of viruses in school, which gets into reducing the risk by doing those things like frequent hand washing with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but to give you highlights of the bullet, really go ahead and stay home when you're sick, just to be safe, regardless of whatever it is. If you don't have soap and water, which I talked to Mr. Dresser today to make sure that our hand sanitizer is 6% alcohol, like they recommended. He said they were. It talks about avoiding the eyes, nose, and mouth. So going forward now, there will be more very clear directives. It is much easier at elementary because they obviously can lead them through a process and a protocol they'll follow. As I heard someone kind of humorously say in the audience, will they follow it? And that's part of the challenge. And I'm not trying to be mean to our students, but secondary students, because I just had the conversation with the high school principal today about, if we in fact continue to move forward with the trip, that we're probably going to need to put some protocols in place with some mandatory things that can happen with regards to hand, whether you have done something or not. We've talked about that those need to be some mandatory protocols. I mean, he gave me an example prior to my time where I guess there was a heat wave issue and they had students report and get a sunscreen put on in a cycle, in a process on a regular basis. So we may need to do some things like that to try to parents to force the issue, that where we can't always say that they're just going to do what we ask on their own. Because the conversation I've had with staff is it's both the well-being of our students who are going, but it's also when they come back and the concerns that people may have. One of our neighboring districts had students come back who went through the normal protocol of the 14 days, but to Mr. Foos's comment, it turned into a hysteria with a lot of speculation when really all they were doing was following the protocol because they had to return early back from overseas in early stages of this as a precautionary measure, just came back. And so we want to create, that was a little bit disruptive to the whole environment, that was kind of unfair to the students because of the false information, but also to the whole school community with fear spreading unnecessarily. But if we do certain protocols and try to make them happen, we're trying to be proactive in alleviating some of those false perceptions of fear that may generate.
So I asked that question specifically because when I spoke to my second grader, she said we are practicing washing our hands for 20 seconds. And when I asked my middle schooler, he was more like, ew, kids wash their hands with water. Like, so I just that conversation about how important.
And so you're actually validating the issue
Right.
that I just described.
Yeah.
We're having more success with our urine.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if we have any other comments or questions on that aspect of it. I did want to, all of the information is very rapidly developing and changing pretty quickly, which is why we went from last week thinking eventually, to all of a sudden in the past week, there's been a ton of new information and different countries that are now involved and implicated. But I think even the current mortality rate, I just read the World Health Organization adjusted it upward. But some of it has to do with the country and their healthcare infrastructure. And I think, different countries that are seeing it right now, that it's adjusting that average up or down. But it's important to think, like, we have our school community and the students, but we also have their friends and family and places they might go out in the community. So as much as we can do as a body to help contain it, not only to protect our children and staff, but also to help protect the larger community. It's an important topic for us to be looking into. So you want to move on to the second piece now?
The second part of this conversation was around the field trip policy. 121 is what governs field trips in the Boyertown Area School District, and there really are two parts to that. But just to be clear, so everyone's, because we have a pretty good-sized audience for a change. Make sure you come back some other Tuesdays too now. But so the definition of a field trip is defined as a trip by students away from school premises that is an integral part of the approved plan of instruction. Just to give you a short definition of what we're talking about, but there's two parts to that. The first part is administratively a trip that is not overnight. We pretty much govern and operate as an administrative team. Trips that are not overnight, we handle administratively. Trips that are overnight require an administrative approval response from the superintendent, but then also must go to the school board for approval also. So it becomes a two-phase process. The issue that we're dealing with, as Mr. Brophy was going to speak to, has to do with the fact that we have, within a week, an upcoming trip, and then about a month from now, one that is actually overseas, internationally. The other part that a lot of people are not aware of is, and as we've been working to make sure they're active, is that we also have administrative regulations, which is pretty much just the superintendent's requirement to have, how do we administer this policy on behalf of the board. And one part of administrative regulation talks about monitoring the frequency of the trips, but it also goes into board-approved trips are subject to change. The board and superintendent shall monitor the risk factor, and as you've seen, we've been doing that. Myself, and then as board members who, by the way, don't get paid, so that's voluntary time to take time to read all that stuff and try to keep up to date. To a requested area, and reserves the right to cancel any travel upon determination of excessive risk as determined by the superintendent and or the school board. So I can bring it forward to the board to identify as an excessive risk, or the board can initiate that as a concern for them for reconsideration. As you know, no individual board member makes that decision. It is a collective majority that would make a decision about any change that has been previously approved. Given the evolution of this issue, we thought it was prudent to make sure that we reaffirm where the board is, because when they approved this issue didn't exist. So given that there is, I wouldn't necessarily say excessive, but there is a risk factor that exists. Would not categorize it as excessive depending on the context you put it in. We have not received, unless you were going to China, that would be excessive because it has a true level 4 rating. To give you the context of what I'm talking about when I say not excessive, so that people understand that I'm not trying to minimize the concern. So we have Dr. Foley here, and then the advisor was asked if you could join Dr. Foley, or whoever, and if you change places with Mr. Drescher, whichever one is going to sit here with Dr. Foley. And then you can, Dr. Foley, you can pull this other roller chair over that side since Ms. Nyman is not here, or something. Board members, you've obviously that we have not received any restrictions from the Pennsylvania Department of Health, CDC, with regards at this point in time to either Florida, which has 2 cases, and Florida's my home. So and my mother's there, so it got my attention. Nor have we received any notification of concerns of not to travel for the trip that's a month away. My conversation with Dr. Foley as recently as this morning, we've talked a couple times, is that I'm not ready at this point, because this thing is evolving so fast, to really think about what are we going to do a month from now, because there's going to be a lot more information that's evolving. But we do have a trip that's coming in a week. I think Dr. Foley, I would ask you to give, or someone to give an overview of that trip and what happens, so the board is clear.
Which trip?
The one in a week, the Orlando trip.
It's Jen Benham, and she is our senior class advisor, and she's basically in charge of the trip that's coming up to Orlando. So if you want to.
So we have 215 students traveling on this trip, and 17 faculty members, including 2 nurses, a counselor, and administrator. We are scheduled to leave Tuesday morning. 2:30 a.m. is the meeting time at the high school, where we will travel from the Philadelphia airport to Orlando. We spend 3 days in Disney and 2 days in Universal, and come home Saturday, March 14th in the evening.
Just to follow up too on that, because when we start talking about the protocols that we're taking, obviously we're watching the stuff too. We've been in contact with the the travel agents, and at this point there's in their mind there is no reason to call this off yet. And in fact, from them today, we are the only school that has even asked about this, and there are several other schools that are planning to go on this very same trip at the same time that we are. The other thing too, working with the folks at Disney, one of the things that they have done, they've stepped up their act too, just like we're going to be doing in our district. Their cleaning procedures have all been stepped up. Everything is sanitized. And that was one of the conversations that, through the travel agency we had with Disney as well, to make sure that things would be safe there. Disney has no intentions of closing at this point, so they don't foresee that.
I would ask that you share our expectation for behavior and our protocol for how quickly you get sent home at your own expense if you don't follow. Because I think there's another layer to this, that as we're going to give directives when we ask students to do things for their safety and well-being, traditionally some of these things we may be asking now may not have existed except for the circumstances. But I think the new board members may not be aware that we have sent students home right away.
Yeah, just so you understand, the protocols there, number one, we've never come back from a trip in my tenure at Boyertown that people haven't gone out of their way to say how well our kids were. And they were amazed that they were high school kids and how well they behaved, from the planes to the hotels all the way back home. So that's first and foremost. So, however, there are some situations where students get sent home. For example, if they do not follow our rules and what we have in mind for them, we will put them on a plane and send them home at their parents' expense. We've talked about that from day one. So when we start this whole process, in fact, we're starting this process already now for next year's trip. They already have the information. This packet is going through, and every kid gets that same packet. We go over that packet several times with them, so they absolutely, without question, they understand the rules. Anybody want to back me up on that? We're students here? Okay. But the point is, they follow our rules. They respond very well to us. And what you're referring to earlier was in Costa Rica, when the kids were in the sun, I was the guy that was in charge to make sure that everybody was putting sunscreen on, and I wouldn't leave until they put it on, because that is what you're going to do. And they all put it on, and there's no question.
So to that point, we have had conversation to the doing similar things with the hand washing protocols, just to know that we know they actually did it because of what you just described, that while we may tell them. So I have asked Dr. Foley to consider with the team to develop a protocol that at least we can account for portions of the day that they actually will go through that we know that it has been done. Additionally, the questions always come up, the cost to the individual and where are they in their ability to get a refund or not if this trip was not to be allowed to continue.
Right now, I think the Florida trip was $1,630 per student. And I think Friday is their last day, if I'm not mistaken, to get a refund if they got the maximum insurance, which means there's different levels of insurance you can get. And the maximum level of insurance in this particular case would say, well, someone else externally decided that we can't go on the trip, so now I'm going to try to apply and get my money back. And even at that, the most they can get back is around 75% of the trip. Correct?
Yes, that is correct. And Friday is that deadline.
So, policy, a shared overview, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Those are online if anyone wants to see them. The regulations are ours at this point. If the board has any questions or concerns, as we prepare to make a decision, if need be, to change anything, or if not, we just keep moving.
Ms. Hogan?
So is there a plan in place if a student were to come down with flu-like symptoms on how that would be handled?
We already have a protocol in place no matter what it is. If a student gets sick, we have both nurses with them at all times, and they're on duty all the time. So we have that protocol in place. We've worked with Disney, we've worked with our travel agents, and there have been kids come home because they were sick too. So yeah, it depends what the situation is. But there's protocol in place.
I don't know what theirs is, but I did receive a communication that not beyond Disney, Orange County and the city of Orlando have, because the governor now declared a state of emergency, has mobilized it to have resources available. So they would automatically, whether you are a resident or not, if they require isolation, they're going to isolate the student because their protocols now in the state, because they now have active cases. So that's the other resource that will be triggered. Now, that just means that we have a student who won't be coming back, and we have to deal with that issue, which will throw a little bit of dynamic that someone, so I just give an example. If it was time for them to return and it happened on Saturday, well, that student would be coming back. So we'd probably have to leave a staff member there while everyone else came back until the parents got there, for example. So that's kind of an example to give you. But I'm sure that Orange County and or City of Orlando would activate their protocols because it's a big part of the industry. And, you know, Disney is probably the largest workforce in that area. So they were already, I'll be honest with you, they're already taking a hit because they've had to shut down overseas. So they're trying to do everything possible to be collaborative in mitigating any concerns with travelers coming into their designated sites in the U.S. as of the last communication I've read. Now, I can't speak to how they're doing it or how well they're doing it, but I'm just sharing with you what I've been reading.
Ms. McWhirter?
Thanks. I have a question, kind of the germaphobe person that I can be. Knowing that I have several friends that travel for business, some of them tell me that they get onto the plane and they wipe down their seat and their tray and everything. Do we have a protocol for? And I mean, it's a great place to exchange viruses is on the plane, and bugs.
We don't necessarily have a protocol now, but that doesn't mean we're not going to establish one. So just so you know, today I spent a lot of time surfing the web trying to find, well, first of all, there is no hand sanitizer in this hemisphere right now, just so you understand. However, there are Lysol wipes and those kind of things, and they're in the travel packs. So even with some of the students we have at school, we've already got them trained now that they wipe everything down where they're at based upon some allergies and things that they have going on. I can see us taking that protocol, wiping your seat down, wiping your tray down, let's move on. Because they have to get into that mode. When you go to the grocery store, I was there last night. I had my my wipes and stuff, and took care of the card even that I was pushing, just because that's a natural thing that I think you're going to start seeing people do. But the protocol we can develop. That's a simple protocol.
Thank you.
So going forward, some of this is within our control. It sounds like, you know, we're generally optimistic that this trip should be fine with some additional precautions. But some of it might be out of our control. If Florida were to say they're restricting travel, I assume that would basically set in motion it for us. We wouldn't have a decision at that point. So I just think it's important that people be aware that what we would like to see happen doesn't necessarily mean a couple of days from now that can't change entirely. Unfortunately, that's the nature of the unknown here.
Okay, I won't belabor the point. My conversation right off the bat, as I said, with Mr. Dr. Foley, was that other than my expectation for him to share with me some additional protocols with hand washing and sanitizing things that you kind of mentioned to as my additional expectation, I really, at this point, did not have a individual concern as a superintendent to stop the trip. But thought because it is out overnight, the board voted on it to give you a chance to chime in to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because honestly, this is one of those issues that people are going to have differing opinions about it. And I would encourage that if someone does and they make their individual choice not to go, if I can't, I'm being transparent to the board, we can't do anything about the cost factor. They spent the money and they didn't pay for the insurance. So there's nothing we'll be able to do about that, as I understand, Dr. Foley, correct? So if they do choose not to attend at this point, that's an individual choice that we can't really intervene and have any authority to do anything over. Any other questions on this item?
So I'm just curious, people are aware that this meeting is taking place and may not know the specifics out of this meeting. Will there be additional communication confirming that as of this time, no further action is being taken about restricting
Yes.
this trip?
Ms. Moyer is there in the back. She actually was supposed to be at a student event, and so Ms. Torshire is there getting pictures of that for her so that she is prepared whatever comes out of this to push out. We pushed out some things earlier, and then purposely she said she was waiting till this conversation was held to see if something changed. Ironically, she got a request from the newspaper asking for our commentary on what we were doing, and we said we would not be commenting to the press until we had this conversation. And to my surprise, she got a communication back saying they wanted to wait to see what we had to say before they published the article. So that was interesting. So I guess Boyertown has clout, you all. But no, she will be pushing information out after this is over. Yeah.
I guess we'll discuss the next upcoming trip.
At this point in time, you have in your packet a list of, attached to your agenda, the list of trips. The dark colored trips that are attached to your administrative section have already been held. The ones that are not color coded are those that are still scheduled. I would encourage you to review it. Share with me if you have some concern that I'm unaware of. But right now, nothing on there jumps to any different than what we're dealing with right now with this Orlando trip. As I said earlier, unless you have something other that you want me to consider, a month away with this evolution, how fast it's changing, I think it would be premature to jump into the trip to Europe at this point in time to think there's something we're going to do differently until we watch the circumstances of how things evolve. So if there's something else you want me to be aware of, I think this is the time, because that is an overseas international trip.
Mr. Brophy.
So if between now and then, all of a sudden a travel ban is initiated, will we bring this up right away and get that information out to everybody so we can make the changes we need to make?
If there's a travel ban, I will first of all tell you automatically it'll be no issue. It'll be done, and we'll communicate that we can't. The travel ban would then also, I think, trigger people to Dr. Foley's ability to say for those who did get the insurance, and I say it that way because when I check with them, that's not always what happens. And again, we can't control that, but then that would be cause potentially for them to get their refund back. But if that happens, then I just notify the board we're not going because of travel ban. It's not a conversation or a meeting. It won't happen.
There wouldn't be any talk of rescheduling then, correct? Or would that become an issue, something to talk about? Because I know if you can't get your money back on that, you might be able to move it to another date. I don't know if that's something that's an issue or an option.
Hi, my name is Steve Blather. I'm the department leader of social studies, and I'm helping with this trip, person in charge. In regards to that question, as far as what happens, I've been in contact with the company extensively over the past few weeks, and what they've done for trips that already exist, say for Italy, that like this all of a sudden became an issue. What they did was they basically gave the schools two options. Option one was reschedule, because the airlines were nice to give them vouchers. Or they could just divert to somewhere safe. So what they did was for some of their Italy trips, they were like, hey, how do you guys feel about France? And they just went to France. So we also have that option. They told me, like, I was like, theoretically, let's say that we have kind of three destinations. So let's say one of them is compromised. I asked, like, could we then go and just choose an alternate safe location and the trip carries on? And they said that is an option available to us.
The parents suggest that we could stay in the continental United States. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. We should stay in the United States and we should just go to Pearl Harbor. Just saying. Still World War II. Sorry.
Okay.
That's what happened. Everybody wanted to go then all of a sudden.
Ms. McWhirter, and then Ms. Deeroff in the queue.
Yeah, so I've been having a lot of conversations about traveling and trip insurance and everything at work, and one of the guys that I work with has trip insurance, and his wife was calling up about another thing, and on the call waiting, the message was, if you're calling about coronavirus, unless it's been a restricted area, that doesn't count.
Ms. Deeroff?
If you went somewhere else, there's no concern about housing, that you have something lined up in the other countries also?
Yeah, so that would be in terms of like our lodging, the tour company would take care of all of that. So they gave me an example. Like, this is a massive company. It's actually the same group that owns what you guys go with Disney. So they had a flight that left for Italy, and Italy was safe, and by the time it landed, it was unsafe. And their company is so nimble that they just bussed them to another country. I think they went to France, and they had lodging. Everything was fine. So like the resources of this company allow them to make very quick changes.
Okay, fine, thank you.
So while we're aware that Italy is currently under the radar, there are schools in France that have shut down over the past day or two. So it is rapidly developing. So I would just advise people to continue to check any of the news outlets and be up to date on it. I certainly hope, it sounds like a great trip. I certainly hope it can go off, but it may be out of our control. All right, so that wraps up our discussion on the coronavirus and travel. At this time, we will move into committee comment if anybody has any additional comments. All right, seeing none. Upcoming meeting dates, Tuesdays, they're on our calendar. I will look for a motion to adjourn. Mr. Brophy, second, Ms. McWhirter. This meeting is adjourned, and then we'll be going into a committee meeting.